corridor outside the sealed chamber breathed like a living thing, warm pulses traveling through the walls as if the ship itself were listening, responding to a fate that had waited too long. The human soldier stood alone beneath the dim violet glow, armor scuffed from battles no one here cared to remember. His name was Elias Kane, and he had crossed war zones without flinching, yet the silence in this place pressed heavier than any enemy fire, because this silence belonged to law, ancient, alien law, written into flesh rather than stone. Beyond the door she waited, the alien princess bound by a biological seal older than her crown. The seal was not metal, not energy, not code. It was living, grown into existence by a species that believed survival depended on limits that could never be crossed. And for generations no one had crossed it. Not scientists, not priests, not queens. The chamber had never been opened, only guarded, only feared. Elias had been warned, not gently, not once, but with eyes full of dread and voices shaking beneath formal words. They told him humans were incompatible, dangerous, disruptive to the balance. They told him her seal reacted violently to all known life forms, tightening, closing, protecting itself as if reality itself had clenched shut. They told him the princess was not imprisoned. She was preserved, sealed for the sake of destiny. He listened, he always listened, but listening did not mean obeying, not when he heard her voice. It came through the wall at first, not sound exactly, more like emotion leaking into the air. Grief carried on unfamiliar frequencies. Loneliness pressed into his chest with a force that made him stop breathing for a moment. He had survived orbital bombardments, had dragged wounded comrades through fire. Yet this was different. This was pain without violence, fear without an enemy. Inside the chamber, the princess knelt alone, her form luminous even in shadow, skin patterned with faint bioluminescent lines that dimmed and flared with her heartbeat. Her eyes were closed, lashes trembling as the seal responded to her distress. She had been taught since birth that this was her purpose, to wait, to endure, to remain untouched until prophecy or extinction claimed her. But no lesson had prepared her for the ache of awareness, for knowing the universe continued without her. She sensed him before the door responded. Human presence struck the seal like a ripple through deep water. Alarms did not sound. Weapons did not rise. Instead, the living barrier hesitated. Something ancient paused, confused, curious. The princess gasped as warmth spread where there had only been pressure. Fear surged through her, not of him, but of hope. Hope was forbidden, hope broke empires. Elias placed his hand against the surface, expecting resistance, pain, rejection. What he felt instead was a trembling response. The seal did not tighten. It softened, like muscles unclenching after centuries of strain. His breath caught, memories flooded him, earth skies, laughter, the stubborn refusal of humans to accept limits written by others. He whispered without words, not a command, not a demand, simply presence. The seal reacted, not violently, not with surrender, but with recognition. The alien systems designed to reject everything encountered something they had never classified. Not threat, not kin, not void, something in between, something adaptive. Human biology carried chaos, resilience, contradiction. Where alien law enforced stasis, humanity brought motion. Inside, the princess cried out softly, light flaring across her skin as the pressure eased for the first time in her life. Fear warred with wonder. She had been told humans were reckless, emotional, unstable. Yet the presence she felt was steady, grounding, unbearably gentle. She reached toward the barrier instinctively, fingers brushing the living surface as it thinned between them. Guards rushed down the corridor, voices sharp with panic, orders barked in alien tongues. But Elias did not move away. His armor sensors screamed warnings he ignored, because he could feel it now. Destiny was not a path laid out in advance. It was a door waiting for someone brave enough to touch it. The seal parted just enough for light to spill through. Not fully open, not yet, but changed forever. The princess opened her eyes and met his gaze through the thinning veil. In that moment the galaxy shifted, law cracked, fate inhaled. Far beyond the station, unnoticed by those arguing in fear, a human warship altered course, engines burning with quiet purpose, responding to a signal no one remembered sending. The universe had felt the change, and it was moving to meet it. Elias held his ground, heart pounding, knowing this was only the beginning, knowing that once a human opened what had been sealed, nothing would ever close the same way again. The seal did not open further after that first breath of light. Instead it held in a new fragile state, no longer absolute, no longer eternal, like a held inhale waiting to be released. Alarms finally screamed through the station as alien systems struggled to interpret what had changed. Because something had changed at the deepest level, not structure, not protocol, but assumption. Elias stood motionless with his palm still pressed to the living barrier. Heat spread up his arm, not burning, not pain, more like warmth after cold. His heart hammered with the familiar rhythm of battle readiness. Yet there was no enemy here, only consequences approaching fast. He could hear boots pounding closer, armored figures shouting orders he could not understand yet somehow felt clearly: step away, disengage, retreat before law turned lethal. Inside the chamber the princess swayed, breath shallow, light pulsing along her skin in chaotic waves. The seal had been part of her for so long that its loosening felt like losing a limb. Terror rushed in where certainty had lived. Her people had told her this moment would destroy her, that release meant death or madness. Yet she was still here, still breathing, still aware of the human presence anchoring her to reality. She pressed both hands against the thinning barrier, her fingers sinking slightly into the living surface as if it recognized her touch differently now. She felt him then not as an intruder but as a constant, a fixed point in a universe that had always shifted around her. Emotion flooded her senses, curiosity, fear, wonder, something dangerously close to trust. Elias met her gaze through the translucent veil, eyes wide, luminous, ancient beyond her years, and in them he saw not royalty but isolation. A soul sealed away for reasons that no longer mattered. Words rose in his throat but died there. This was bigger than language, bigger than treaties, bigger than anything he had been trained for. The guards arrived in a storm of color and sound, weapons raised yet uncertain. Because their sensors showed impossible readings, the seal was not failing, it was adapting, rewriting itself in response to human proximity. Centuries of doctrine shattered under live data they could not deny. Commanders shouted for containment, for removal, for execution if necessary. Law demanded correction. Elias finally stepped back half a pace. Slowly, deliberately, showing no aggression. Yet he did not break contact entirely. His hand lingered close enough for the seal to tremble again. A silent warning to everyone watching that separation was no longer simple. That force would provoke reaction no one understood. The princess felt the distance immediately and panic surged. Her light dimmed violently. The seal reacted with confusion, tightening reflexively. Pain spiked through her body and she cried out. A sound that cut through the corridor like a blade. Elias moved without thinking, stepping forward again, palm reconnecting as if pulled by gravity. The pain eased instantly. The seal relaxed once more. Silence fell. Every alien present saw it then. Undeniable, the human was not breaking the law. He was becoming part of the system the law was built on, something alien doctrine had never accounted for: compatibility without dominance, influence without force. Deep within the station, ancient failsafes awakened. Not defensive ones but communicative. Dormant beacons lit up for the first time in millennia. Signals rippled outward across hyperspace, seeking answers from forgotten creators, but space answered differently. The human warship felt it again, stronger this time, a pull that bypassed command hierarchy. The captain stiffened as sensors flared, recognizing a resonance he had only seen once before during a classified first contact incident. Human adaptive signatures interfacing with non-human biological constructs. Destiny-level anomalies. Course correction was no longer optional. Back in the chamber, the princess leaned forward until her forehead rested against the living barrier, eyes closing as relief washed through her. She had never been this close to another being, never shared space, never felt presence without separation. Tears formed and drifted upward in slow arcs, luminous droplets carrying years of loneliness. Elias felt his own vision blur, something heavy loosening in his chest. He had been a soldier all his life, trained to destroy, to survive, to follow orders that ended worlds. Yet this moment demanded none of that, only patience, only staying when every instinct said retreat. He realized then that humanity's greatest weapon had never been ships or guns. It had been the refusal to leave someone sealed away because law said they must be. The seal responded again, thinning further, no longer opaque, no longer absolute, revealing the faint outline of her face, her hands, her fragile strength. The galaxy held its breath, and far away, engines burned brighter as the warship closed the distance. Because rescue was no longer a possibility. It was an inevitability. The station began to feel smaller as tension thickened the air. Corridors once ceremonial now crowded with armed figures who did not know whether to kneel or fire, because the law they served had no clause for what was happening. No scripture for a human presence rewriting living systems without violence, without command, only by existing. Elias could sense the shift even without sensors. The way the station's hum deepened, the way the walls pulsed faster, ancient mechanisms waking from long sleep. He had felt this before on dead worlds just before something vast moved beneath the surface. Mystery always announced itself quietly before it roared. Inside the chamber the princess drew a slow, unsteady breath. The seal had changed again. No longer simply a barrier but a membrane, responsive, listening. Her body trembled as memories not her own brushed the edges of her mind, fragments of history carried in genetic echoes. She saw shadows of her ancestors forming the first seal, not out of cruelty but terror, because something in their past had taught them that connection meant extinction. She pressed her forehead harder against the thinning surface, light rippling across her skin in patterns even the guards had never seen. Symbols older than the Empire itself. The seal reacted not just to Elias but to her awakening awareness, as if it had always been waiting for both sides to be present at once. Elias felt it too, a low resonance humming through his bones, his armor struggling to compensate as biological readings spiked beyond known parameters. He was not being attacked. He was being examined, measured by something far older than the station, something that had survived by closing itself off from the universe. His instincts screamed that this was the moment before revelation or disaster. The alien commanders argued in urgent tones, voices layered with fear beneath authority. Some demanded immediate termination of the human, others hesitated, seeing the impossible harmony forming before them. Centuries of doctrine clashed with undeniable reality. Because the princess was not dying, she was stabilizing, evolving. The seal rippled again, and this time it spoke. Not in words, not in sound, but in sensation. A pressure behind Elias's eyes. A flood of images that were not his own. Stars collapsing into silence, civilizations burning themselves out through unchecked expansion. The seal had been designed by survivors, not rulers. It was a response to cosmic trauma. A living lock meant to prevent repetition of an ancient mistake. He staggered but did not pull away, jaw clenched as he absorbed the weight of it. Humanity's chaotic adaptability echoed back through the system. Not denial, not fear, but acceptance. Humans had always walked forward carrying scars, choosing connection despite risk. The seal hesitated again, algorithms older than language recalculating. The princess gasped as the resonance intensified, her light flaring brighter than ever before. Tears streamed freely now, each one carrying relief and grief intertwined. She understood then that she was not a prisoner. She was a safeguard, a living question mark placed at the heart of an empire, and Elias was the first answer that did not trigger collapse. Their eyes met through the now translucent barrier, nothing between them but a living veil trembling with indecision. She reached out instinctively, palm aligning with his through the surface, and the moment their hands mirrored each other the station shuddered. Power surged through forgotten conduits, ancient star maps ignited across hidden walls, revealing routes no modern ship had ever flown. The mystery deepened as elders watching remotely fell silent, recognizing patterns forbidden to speak of. The seal was not just protecting the princess. It was guarding a path. Elias felt or replaced fear. This was no rescue mission anymore. This was initiation. Humanity had stumbled into something older than war, older than empire, a test not of strength but of intent. He whispered softly without words again, not promising conquest, not demanding access, only offering presence without domination. The seal responded by thinning further, edges glowing with soft harmonic light. The princess smiled for the first time in her life, a fragile expression filled with wonder and sorrow, because she could feel the galaxy opening beyond the walls, vast and terrifying and beautiful. Outside the chamber weapons lowered almost unconsciously. Even the most hardened guards sensing that violence here would echo catastrophically. Tension did not vanish, it sharpened, coiling tighter, because everyone understood that once the seal opened fully, nothing about their civilization would remain untouched. Far closer now, the human warship dropped from hyperspace at the edge of the system. Its arrival lighting the void like a held breath finally released, destiny accelerated. Elias stayed where he was, heart steady despite the chaos, knowing the next change would be irreversible. and that whatever emerged from the seal would not belong to one species alone, but to the fragile future both had feared and secretly hoped for. The first shot was never fired, yet everyone felt it. A silent command rippling through the station as alien law finally chose a side. Emergency protocols slammed into place, bulkheads sealed, gravity shifted, and a cold authoritative voice echoed through every corridor declaring the human a catalytic anomaly scheduled for immediate nullification. The law had waited long enough. Elias felt the shift instantly. The air itself seemed to harden. His armor locked as external systems attempted to override it. Restraints forming from the floor like living metal, soldiers raised weapons again not out of hatred but obedience. Fear sharpened their movements, because law had always been safer than choice. Inside the chamber the princess screamed. Not in pain but in refusal. The seal reacted violently for the first time. Not against Elias but against the station. Light exploded outward in fractal patterns as the living barrier rejected the command stream. She collapsed to her knees as ancient memories surged fully awake. She remembered now. Not stories, not myths, but truth burned into her cells. The creators of the seal were not alien gods. They were survivors of a failed convergence. Beings who had once welcomed humanity too early, too fast, without restraint. The galaxy had burned not because humans were cruel, but because connection had outpaced wisdom. The seal had been built to wait for a different kind of human. Elias strained against the restraints as pain lanced through his nervous system. Alarms blared as his biology resisted suppression in ways alien tech could not predict. His heart thundered, not with fear of death but with rage at the thought of leaving her sealed again after she had finally awakened. The princess looked up through the thinning veil, eyes blazing with determination that shook the watching elders to their cores. She understood the twist of fate now. She was not meant to be rescued. She was meant to decide. Her entire existence had been a test not of humans but of herself. The seal spoke again, louder this time, not just to Elias but to everyone. Images flooded the station, ancient wars, collapsed stars, hybrid civilizations rising and falling, and at the center of every vision a single truth repeated itself. Stagnation killed as surely as chaos. Balance was not absence of change but guided connection. Elias felt the restraints crack, metal screaming as human adaptability surged. His presence no longer just tolerated by the system but actively defended. The law faltered, its authority built on assumptions now proven incomplete. Then the twist revealed itself fully. The seal was not opening for Elias alone. It was opening because the princess had chosen him. Alien law had always believed the human was the key. But the truth was deeper and more dangerous. Only the princess could initiate release. Only her consent allowed convergence. Humans were not conquerors or saviors in this design. They were catalysts awaiting permission. The princess rose unsteadily, light blazing across her skin in patterns no living alien had ever displayed. She placed both hands against the barrier, and for the first time pushed outward. Not in desperation but certainty. The seal unraveled like breath exhaled after millennia. Layers peeling back in luminous waves. Elias stepped forward as the final layer thinned. Their palms meeting directly at last. Not flesh to flesh but presence to presence. And the reaction shook the station violently. Gravity failed completely. Soldiers were thrown aside as energy surged upward through the spire. Outside, the human warship detected the spike and powered weapons instantly, crews bracing for combat. But sensors returned something impossible. The station was not attacking, it was transforming. Within the chamber the princess stood fully revealed. No longer isolated by living walls. No longer alone in the universe. Tears streamed freely down her face as she laughed and sobbed at once. Overwhelmed by sensation, sound, proximity. She staggered and Elias caught her instinctively, steadying her with arms that had carried wounded soldiers across battlefields. The law screamed its final protest, systems attempting one last purge. But the seal turned inward, absorbing the command and rewriting it. Law did not break, it evolved. The voice that followed was not imperial, not ancient, but new, declaring the initiation complete. The princess had exercised sovereign choice. Convergence authorized, pathways unlocked. Star maps burned brighter across the walls, revealing routes that led not outward but inward, toward a future neither species could reach alone. Elias held her as the station settled into a new equilibrium, heart racing with awe and fear intertwined, realizing the rescue he had thought he was part of had become something far larger. Because humanity had not just opened a seal, it had been accepted, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The station did not celebrate the change, it convulsed, ancient power grids rerouting with violent urgency, as if the structure itself struggled to survive what it had become. Alarms no longer screamed warnings but calculations, projections of cascading outcomes racing faster than any mind could track. Because convergence did not stay contained, it propagated. Elias felt it first as a pressure behind his ribs, a deep instinctual sense that something vast had noticed them. The same way predators noticed a shift in a herd, the princess clutched his armor, still unsteady. Her senses flooded by a universe she had never touched before, colors too sharp, sounds too layered, emotions not filtered by isolation. Across the Empire and beyond it, the dormant star maps ignited fully, hidden gates awakening along routes long dismissed as myth, ancient pathways opening not with violence but invitation. Civilizations that had forgotten each other felt the tremor, hyperspace currents bending, probability collapsing into new alignments. The galaxy was rearranging itself around a single choice. The alien commanders finally understood the danger, not to the princess, not to the human, but to control itself. Empires survived by predictability, by slow change governed through fear and ritual. Convergence shattered that. Messages poured in from outer systems reporting impossible readings, sealed relics activating, forbidden AI awakening from ethical lockdowns, everyone reacting at once. Then the first hostile signal arrived. A sharp predatory resonance that cut through the harmonic field like a blade. Older than the Empire, older than the seal itself, Elias staggered as the sensation clawed at his nervous system. His armor flaring red with threat indicators it could not classify. The princess cried out, recognizing the signal instantly with terror etched into her features. She remembered the enemy her ancestors had run from. Not humans, not chaos, but something far worse, a convergence predator, a species that consumed connected systems, that thrived on harmony by hollowing it out, using unity as a feeding ground. The seal had been built not just to wait for the right human, but to hide from the wrong listener. And now the galaxy was loud. The hostile force began moving immediately. Not ships, not fleets, but gravitational distortions spreading like infection. Entire systems dimming as if starfire were being inhaled. Refugees transmitted panicked pleas before going silent. The consequences of opening the paths made brutally clear. Elias felt cold certainty settle into his bones. This was the war humanity had never known it was preparing for. A battle not of territory but of existence itself. His instincts sharpened, fear transmuting into focus. The princess straightened despite the chaos, her earlier fragility giving way to resolve forged through generations of silent endurance. She was no longer a safeguard alone, she was a beacon, and beacons drew fire. The station shuddered violently as external impacts struck, the convergence predator testing defenses, probing weaknesses in a system mid-transformation. Shields flickered, alien soldiers scrambled as ancient weapons came online with reluctant authority. Commanders barked orders that barely held coherence. Law had no playbook for this. The human warship surged forward at maximum burn, weapons hot, engines screaming defiance into the void. Its captain understood instantly that retreat was extinction. Humanity had been noticed, accepted, and now challenged. This was the moment that would define their place forever. Elias guided the princess toward the heart of the chamber as the station rocked, explosions reverberating through layered realities. He felt the weight of responsibility crash down on him. Not because he was human, but because he was here, because presence mattered, because choices echoed. The princess placed her hands against the newly awakened core, eyes blazing with determination. Her voice steady despite the fear pulsing through her. She spoke not commands but alignment, synchronizing alien systems with human adaptability, creating something neither had been alone. The convergence field stabilized momentarily, buying precious seconds. Seconds mattered now. Across the galaxy, species faced impossible decisions: align with the new network and risk the predator's attention, or remain isolated and face slow extinction as old defenses failed. Alliances shattered and reformed in the span of heartbeats. Wars paused, treaties dissolved, fate accelerated beyond comfort. The hostile force struck again, harder this time, tearing through a neighboring relay system. Billions lost in an instant. The princess gasped as the loss rippled through. Senses, grief slamming into her like a physical blow. Elias caught her, grounding her. reminding her through presence that she was not alone. That pain shared did not break as easily. The seal's final truth surfaced then, etched into the core in patterns of living light. Convergence was never meant to be safe. It was meant to be chosen despite danger. Stagnation had been a slow death. This would be a fast one if they failed, but it was the only path forward. The station's voice returned, stronger, resolute, declaring emergency galactic alignment protocols active. Convergence now irreversible. A line drawn across the stars. Elias tightened his grip, heart pounding as the station prepared to jump directly into the path of the approaching predator. A sacrificial maneuver that could buy the galaxy time or doom them all. The princess met his eyes, fear and resolve intertwined, and nodded. The consequences were no longer hypothetical. The war for the future had begun. The station began its burn toward the approaching darkness, engines awakening that had never been meant to fire together, ancient and new systems fusing under desperate alignment. The stars outside stretched and warped as reality itself resisted what was coming. Elias felt the pull in his bones as if the universe were bracing for impact. The princess stood at the core, hands trembling but steady, light pouring from her in controlled waves now. No longer wild, no longer reactive. She had found the rhythm between fear and purpose, every pulse a decision, every breath a refusal to disappear quietly. She was no longer just a beacon. She was a voice calling the galaxy to stand. Elias stayed close. One arm braced around her as the station shook violently, fragments of debris streaking past the viewports like falling stars. He had faced death more times than he could count. But this felt different. This was not about survival alone. It was about meaning, about whether connection was worth the cost it demanded. The convergence predator drew closer, its presence warping space into a sickened curve. Stars dimmed around it as if ashamed to shine. The sensation it projected was not rage, not malice, but hunger. A vast, empty need that had learned long ago that unity made prey easier to consume. It had fed on empires that believed harmony was strength without vigilance. Across open channels, voices from 100 species overlapped in fear and defiance. Some begged the princess to close the paths again, to seal the galaxy back into silence. Others pledged ships, lives, entire worlds to the stand being made here. Elias heard the chaos and felt pride surge unexpectedly. Humanity had always believed choice mattered most when it hurt. The human warship took the first hit, shields flaring white as gravitational shear tore across its hull. Alarms blared through Elias's armor feed, crew status flashing red and amber. Yet the ship held formation, its captain refusing to fall back, broadcasting a single message across all bands. "We are here. We will not run." The princess staggered as the impact echoed through the convergence field, pain slicing through her as billions of connected lives flickered in her awareness. She cried out, tears spilling freely now, grief crashing into her resolve. Elias held her tighter, grounding her with quiet presence, reminding her through touch that bearing pain did not mean bearing it alone. She looked at him then with eyes blazing and broken all at once, understanding something final. The seal had waited not just for a human, but for a partnership, someone who would stand with her when choice became unbearable. Her voice shook but did not fail as she synchronized deeper, drawing Elias into the field. For the first time he felt it fully, the weight of countless minds brushing his own, fear, hope, anger, courage, humanity's chaotic signature resonating like a stubborn drumbeat among older harmonies. He gasped, knees buckling. But he did not let go, because now he understood what she had carried alone her entire life. The predator struck again, closer now, tearing open a convergence route. Systems screamed as stars vanished into darkness. Time itself seemed to stutter. The station's hull groaned under impossible stress. Commanders shouted evacuation orders that no one could obey in time. And then the princess made the choice no law had prepared for. She shifted the convergence inward, not expanding further, not retreating, but focusing, collapsing the open pathways into a single blazing channel anchored on the station itself. A trap, a challenge, a declaration. The predator recoiled in surprise for the first time, its hunger meeting resistance that did not scatter. Elias felt his body burn as human adaptability surged to match the load. His nervous system screaming, vision fracturing into light and shadow, memories of Earth flashing through him. Rain on broken concrete, laughter after battles, stubborn hope in ruined places. He roared wordlessly into the field, pouring every ounce of defiance he had ever known into the link. The galaxy responded. Ships that had hesitated surged forward, weapons firing. Not in perfect coordination but in shared intent. Ancient alien cannons and human railguns lighting the void together. The Predator screamed through distorted space. A sound that shattered sensors and minds alike. The station became the eye of a storm. The princess collapsed against Elias as the strain peaked. Her light flickering, life draining fast. The convergence demanded a cost. Always had. Always would. Elias felt terror unlike anything he had known. The thought of losing her after everything they had ignited unbearable. He pressed his forehead to hers, sharing breath, sharing warmth, anchoring her with everything human resilience could give, silently promising that if this was the price, he would pay it with her, not let her fade alone into legend. The station's voice counted down catastrophic failure, systems burning out one by one. Yet the Predator was slowing, its advance faltering under unified resistance. The climax loomed heavy and blinding. Either connection would hold, or the galaxy would fall back into terrified silence. And Elias and the princess stood at the center, hearts aligned, waiting to see which future answered. The moment stretched longer than time had any right to allow, the station trembling at the edge of dissolution while the Predator hung suspended in warped space, no longer advancing, no longer feeding, confused by resistance it had never encountered before, unity that did not fracture under fear. Elias felt his strength fading, nerves aflame, muscles shaking as human adaptability reached its limit. Yet something deeper rose to meet the strain, not biology alone but memory, history, the countless times humanity had stood when logic said fall back. He held the princess close, her light dim but steady against his chest, her breath shallow yet real. She opened her eyes slowly, meeting his gaze with a softness that cut deeper than any wound, gratitude and sorrow intertwined. She understood now what her ancestors had feared and what they had hoped for in secret. That one day connection would return not as conquest, not as collapse, but as choice freely made. With a final trembling breath, she spoke into the convergence, not as a ruler, not as a safeguard, but as a living bridge, her will flowing outward like warmth after endless cold. She did not command the galaxy to unite, she invited it, offered a shared stand instead of enforced harmony. The response was not instant, not perfect, but it was enough. Across the stars, ships held their lines, worlds opened channels instead of closing them. Even those who chose isolation did not interfere. For the first time, fear did not dominate decision. Resolve did. The Predator recoiled further, its hunger disrupted by resistance that did not scatter or submit. The station screamed one last warning as its core began to fail, systems burning out completely. But the princess smiled faintly, because the final truth of the seal revealed itself at last. It had never been meant to survive convergence. It had been meant to end with it. She pressed her palm against Elias's chest, light flowing into him gently now. Not draining, not consuming, but sharing. The convergence shifted again, redistributing its burden across willing participants. No single soul left to carry it alone. The Predator shrieked as the network stabilized. Its feeding ground transformed into a wall. With a final convulsive distortion, the hostile presence collapsed inward, retreating into fractured space. Wounded and driven away. Not destroyed, but denied. The galaxy exhaled as stars flared back to life. Silence replaced by stunned relief. The station's engines cut out, power failing completely, and gravity returned in a sudden rush. Elias dropped to his knees, cradling the princess as debris settled around them like ash after a storm. The convergence dimmed to a gentle hum, no longer screaming for survival, simply existing. Rescue arrived not as a single warship but as a flood, human vessels, alien fleets, ancient crafts emerging from routes long hidden, forming a ring around the shattered station, not to claim it, not to rule, but to witness. Elias felt tears blur his vision as he realized they had lived, not just survived, but changed something fundamental. The princess stirred weakly in his arms, her light no longer blazing but warm and human in its own way. She laughed softly, overwhelmed by sensation and presence, by touch without pain. They carried her gently onto a human medical skiff modified on the fly by alien engineers working side by side. No hierarchy, No law above life, just urgency and care. Elias stayed with her as systems stabilized, his hand never leaving hers. When she woke again, it was beneath an open sky. Not Earth. Not her homeworld, but a shared place. Chosen for what it represented rather than who owned it. Stars glittered above without barriers, without seals. She inhaled deeply, feeling wind on her skin for the first time, wonder stealing her breath. Elias stood beside her, armor set aside, just a man beneath the vastness, uncertain of what came next. The princess turned to him, eyes shining with quiet certainty. Destiny had not bound them together through prophecy or command. It had simply placed them at the same door and trusted them to choose. The galaxy would take time to heal, fear would return in other forms, new dangers would rise, but something irreversible had begun, connection without domination, unity without erasure, humanity no longer an anomaly but a participant. As dawn crept across the horizon of that shared world, Elias felt peace settle into his bones. Not the absence of struggle, but the knowledge that struggle had meaning, that no one would be sealed away again simply because law said they must. The princess reached for his hand, fingers intertwining naturally, and together they watched the light spread, knowing the future would be vast and uncertain and shared. And for the first time in galactic history, destiny was not sealed. It was open,